My family threw a lavish $15,000 birthday party at a luxury venue and conveniently forgot to invite me, even though my sister and I share the exact same birthday. When I confronted my mother, she told me they could only afford one party, and my sister needed the aesthetics for her followers. What they did not know was that the $15,000 they spent was stolen directly from my account. So I threw my own party, and the guest list made my sister call me screaming at 1 in the morning. I am Riley, 33 years old, and a senior financial auditor working in downtown Manhattan. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust broken by the people who were supposed to protect you, only to realize you had the power to destroy their facade all along. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and the city lights were reflecting off the glass walls of my high-rise office. My desk was covered in complex tax files, but the silence of the empty floor was abruptly broken by the sharp ping of a notification on my phone. I reached over expecting an email from a client. Instead, it was an automated banking alert that made my blood run cold. Transaction alert. $15,000 successfully transferred from the Family Elder Care Trust. Payee the Crystal Ballroom. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The Family Elder Care Trust was an account I had opened 3 years ago. I deposited a portion of every single paycheck into that account to ensure my parents would have a safety net for medical emergencies or retirement care. It was a joint account for emergency access, but I was the sole contributor. The Crystal Ballroom was not a hospital or a nursing facility. It was the most expensive, exclusive event venue in the city. My fingers flew across the keypad as I dialed my mother's number. The phone rang 3 times before Beatrice picked up the background noise, loud with chatter and clinking glasses. "Riley, I am busy," Beatrice answered. Her tone was light, airy, and completely devoid of any guilt. "Mom, I just got an alert from the bank. $15,000 was just drained from the Elder Care Trust to a place called the Crystal Ballroom. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. Tell me your card was stolen." Beatrice let out a long, dramatic sigh, the kind she always used when she felt I was being unreasonable. "Oh, calm down, Riley. Stop being so dramatic. It is not stolen. I paid for the venue for Brianna's birthday party." My chest tightened. Brianna was my younger sister. She was turning 28 today. I was turning 33. We shared the same birthday, a fact my mother had completely glossed over. "You took $15,000 from the emergency medical fund to pay for a party?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "Mom, that money is for your health, not for renting out a luxury ballroom." "You do not understand how the modern world works," Beatrice snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. "Brianna is an influencer. She is so close to hitting 1 million followers on her social media. She needs the right aesthetic. She needs the crystal chandeliers and the premium catering to attract luxury sponsors. This is an investment in her career." "An investment," I repeated, gripping the edge of my mahogany desk. "An investment is a stock or a bond, Mom. A party is a liability, and you used my money to fund it." "It is family money," Beatrice argued smoothly. "You make a 6-figure salary sitting in that boring office of yours. Why are you throwing a fit over a measly 15 grand? Your sister is the future of this family. She is building a brand. You should be proud to help her instead of being so selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For as long as I could remember, that was her favorite weapon against me. When I refused to do Brianna's college homework, I was selfish. When I moved to the city to accept my corporate job instead of staying home to help Brianna launch her makeup line, I was selfish. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from a deep, boiling rage. "Today is my birthday too. You did not even send me a text message. But you drained my hard-earned savings to throw Brianna a lavish party and did not even invite me." "Oh, please do not start with the victim routine," Beatrice scoffed. "You know we can only afford one party. You are older, you do not need the spotlight. Brianna needs this for her brand. Plus, your cheap corporate suits do not really fit the vibe she is going for tonight. We have important people coming. Investors. You would just make things awkward." The line went dead. She actually hung up on me. I sat there in the quiet of my office, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The betrayal was not just the money. It was the absolute lack of respect, the utter disregard for my existence on the day I was born. I looked down at my phone. The banking app was still open. I clicked into the transaction details to look at the withdrawal authorization. My mother had not just used the debit card. The transfer required a signed authorization form. I pulled up the document image provided by the bank. There at the bottom of the form was my signature. Except I had never signed it. Beatrice had forged my name to bypass the transfer limits. My own mother had committed federal wire fraud to buy my sister a party aesthetic. I took a deep breath, the anger crystallizing into pure cold focus. They wanted to play with high-stakes finance. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I stared at the forged document on my computer screen, the glaring evidence of my mother's crime staring right back at me. Slowly my hand reached out and gripped the pen resting on my desk. It was a cheap, branded plastic pen I had picked up at a university career fair over a decade ago. I kept it as a daily reminder. A reminder of the day I learned exactly where I stood in my family's hierarchy. I was 18 years old, holding an acceptance letter to my absolute dream university. When I found out the college fund I had been promised my entire life was completely empty. My mother had drained it. Every single cent was gone. When I confronted her crying and confused, she simply pointed out the window to our driveway. Sitting there was a brand new cherry red convertible. Brianna was 16 at the time. My mother looked at me with that same dismissive expression she used tonight and told me that Brianna was simply too pretty to ride the public bus to high school. She told me I was smart and I would figure out the student loans. And I did. I figured out how to work 3 separate jobs. I figured out how to study until my eyes physically ached, and I figured out how to shoulder $80,000 in crushing student debt while my sister wrecked that convertible 6 months later and immediately got a new luxury SUV as an apology for her emotional trauma. The memory faded, but the cold reality of the forged document remained. Beatrice had gotten sloppy. She thought that because I had quietly absorbed the abuse for 33 years, I would just absorb this financial theft too. She thought she was untouchable simply because she was my mother. My phone buzzed aggressively against the mahogany desk, vibrating with a new text message. I picked it up, expecting another gaslighting paragraph from my mother demanding I apologize for being difficult. Instead, the screen displayed a message from Xavier, my African-American brother-in-law. Xavier was a self-proclaimed tech visionary, whose immense arrogance was matched only by his rapidly declining bank account. He had married Brianna 2 years ago, and they were a match made in superficial heaven, constantly chasing a lifestyle they could not actually afford. The text message read, "Hey Riley, Beatrice said you are having a meltdown over the party deposit. Look, if you are planning to crash the ballroom later to cause a scene, do us a massive favor and leave your cheap corporate suits at home. Brianna is filming content tonight, and your aesthetic is completely off-brand for her feed. Honestly, it is best if you just sit this one out entirely. We did not reserve a plate for you anyway. Happy birthday or whatever." I read the message twice. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not cry. A terrifying, calculating calm washed over me. Xavier was lecturing me about aesthetics and money while standing in a luxury ballroom paid for by my stolen retirement funds. I knew exactly why they had chosen the Crystal Ballroom. It was not just about Brianna's social media followers. Xavier had been desperately trying to secure Series B funding for his failing mobile application. He was using this exorbitant party as a high-profile networking event, a shiny facade to trick angel investors into thinking he was successful enough to casually burn 15 grand on a Tuesday night. He needed to look like a millionaire to secure the millions he actually needed to stay out of bankruptcy, and he was doing it on my dime while simultaneously mocking the very career that funded it. I opened my laptop and bypassed my standard work dashboard, logging directly into the bank's secure fraud portal. As a senior financial auditor, I spent my days hunting down corporate embezzlement, tracking illicit shell companies, and freezing offshore accounts for multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. Exposing a clumsy amateur forgery committed by a suburban housewife was not even a warm-up exercise for someone with my skill set. I meticulously filled out the official affidavit of forgery. I attached the high-resolution screenshot of the forged signature. I uploaded my verified government identification and my time-stamped corporate location data, proving unequivocally that I was nowhere near the physical bank branch when that authorization was signed. I typed up the incident report with clinical precision, noting the exact federal wire fraud statutes my mother had willfully violated. I hovered my mouse over the bright red submit button. Once I clicked it, the banking algorithms would immediately take over. It usually took exactly 90 minutes for the automated fraud department to freeze the compromised accounts and initiate a hard reversal of the stolen funds. 90 minutes. If I submitted the claim right now, the money would be forcefully pulled back right in the middle of Brianna's lavish dinner service. But I did not click submit. Not yet. Taking my money back was only half the equation. They had insulted my career, mocked my wardrobe, and treated my existence as a shameful secret to be hidden from their glamorous guests. Xavier wanted to play the role of the big-shot tech mogul, and Brianna wanted to be the elite socialite. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to stay far away from their party. I scheduled the fraud alert to execute automatically at exactly 10:30 tonight. Then I closed the banking portal and opened my private encrypted contact list. This was a list of names my brother-in-law would have sold his own soul to access. It was time to throw a birthday party of my own, and I was about to invite the exact people he was hoping to impress. I scrolled through my phone, bypassing the contacts for my so-called family, and stopped on the name of my boss, Mr. Kensington. He was a billionaire venture capitalist who owned a massive portfolio of luxury real estate, including the Apex, an ultra-exclusive private rooftop lounge hovering above the city skyline. It was the kind of place Xavier dreamed of getting into, where billion-dollar tech acquisitions were finalized over rare scotch and hand-rolled cigars. I hit dial. He answered on the second ring. Riley Kensington's booming voice filled the quiet office. "It is Friday night. Tell me you are not still looking at the merger documents." "Not tonight," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Actually, I am calling to ask for a favor. Today is my birthday." "Well, happy birthday," he said warmly. "What do you need?" "I need the keys to the Apex for the evening," I said. "Just for a few hours. I want to host a small impromptu gathering." There was a brief pause, then a chuckle. "You saved my firm $4 million in tax liabilities last quarter. The Apex is yours. Do you mind if I bring Donovan and a few of the other partners?" We were looking for a quiet place to grab a drink away from the crowds. Mr. Donovan was one of the largest tech investors on the East Coast. Xavier had been stalking his corporate profile for 6 months, trying to pitch his failing mobile application. "I would be honored," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face. "Tell them drinks are on me." I packed my laptop and left the office. The night air was crisp as I hailed a cab back to my apartment. My family assumed I lived in a cramped, outdated studio because I never invited them over. They had no idea I owned a sprawling modern penthouse overlooking the river. I liked keeping my sanctuary completely separate from their relentless judgment. Walking into my quiet living room, I kicked off my work heels and opened my social media applications. Brianna's profile popped up first. She was streaming live from the Crystal Ballroom. The venue was undeniably gorgeous, draped in white silk and elaborate floral arrangements that I had unknowingly paid for. But what made my stomach turn was the background. I saw my Aunt Susan laughing near an elaborate ice sculpture. I saw Uncle David grabbing a drink at the premium open bar. I saw my cousins posing for photos in front of a massive neon sign reading Brianna's 28th. My entire extended family was there. Dozens of people who shared my DNA, people I had bought Christmas gifts for every single year. And not a single one of them had sent me a text message today to say happy birthday. The golden child and the scapegoat. It was a dynamic I had read about in psychology journals, but seeing it play out in high definition on my phone was a different kind of pain. Brianna was the shiny object they wanted to orbit. I was the quiet worker bee who only existed to fund their delusions of grandeur. I watched Xavier step into the frame. He was wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket, aggressively scanning the room. He looked anxious, his eyes darting toward the entrance every time the heavy wooden doors opened. I knew exactly why. Earlier in the week, my firm ran a routine background check on several tech startups for an acquisition portfolio. Xavier's company was on that list. I pulled his public financial records out of sheer curiosity. The numbers were catastrophic. He was bleeding capital, his user acquisition cost was astronomical, and he had zero liquidity left in his operating accounts. He was practically broke. He had hyped up this birthday party as an exclusive networking event to his remaining investors, promising them a night of absolute luxury to prove his company was thriving. But looking at the background of Brianna's video, I did not see a single tech investor. I only saw my freeloading relatives devouring expensive appetizers. I picked up my phone and opened my text thread with Brianna. She had ignored my last 3 messages, but I knew she was glued to her screen tonight, monitoring her engagement metrics. I typed a short, simple message. Enjoying the $15,000. I hit send and tossed the phone onto my sofa. I walked into my huge walk-in closet, bypassing the neat rows of corporate blazers Xavier had mocked so relentlessly. Instead, my hand reached for a heavy garment bag. Inside was a custom-tailored midnight blue silk gown I bought to celebrate my promotion. It was elegant, powerful, and screamed quiet wealth. The trap was perfectly set. The automated fraud alert was ticking down like a silent time bomb waiting for 10:30 tonight. And I was about to become the most important person in the city, surrounded by the exact titans of industry my arrogant brother-in-law was desperately praying for. Happy birthday to me. I let the heavy silk of the midnight blue gown slide over my shoulders, the fabric feeling like armor against my skin. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master suite, I did not recognize the frightened 18-year-old girl who had once begged our mother for bus fare. The woman staring back at me was a senior financial auditor, a corporate predator who dismantled fraudulent companies before breakfast. My bank accounts reflected my dedication, and my life was mine alone. My family genuinely believed I lived in a cramped, moldy studio apartment in the darkest corner of Queens. They assumed I was barely surviving eating instant noodles to pay off the massive student debt my mother had forced upon me. They had never bothered to visit. If they had, they would have found themselves standing in the lobby of one of the most exclusive residential high-rises in Manhattan. They would have seen the imported Italian marble, the private elevator, and the sweeping views of the Hudson River from my penthouse balcony. Keeping them in the dark was a deliberate choice. It was a firewall between my hard-earned peace and their relentless chaos. I walked back into the living room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, and picked up my phone. Brianna had not replied to my text message. She was too busy pretending to be a millionaire. I opened her Instagram story again, forcing myself to look closely at the faces of our extended family. The people who were happily devouring prime rib paid for by my stolen emergency fund. There was Aunt Martha wearing her imitation pearls, laughing loudly next to the ice sculpture. This was the same Aunt Martha who had called me a difficult child when I refused to let Brianna copy my high school science projects. Beside her stood my cousin Greg holding a glass of top-shelf bourbon. Greg had reached out to me 6 months ago, crying over the phone, asking for a $5,000 loan to fix his work truck. I transferred the money that same day, no questions asked. Yet here he was celebrating the sister who had never worked a single day in her adult life, without so much as sending me a generic text message to say happy birthday. Looking at their smiling faces, the psychological architecture of our family became glaringly obvious. The dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat is a vicious system designed to keep everyone trapped in their designated roles. Brianna was the golden child. She was the gleaming trophy my mother could display to prove she was a successful parent. Brianna was allowed to be flawed and deeply irresponsible because her spectacular failures were always met with endless grace and an open checkbook. She was the family mascot. But every golden child requires a scapegoat to absorb the family shadow. That was my designated role. I was the dumping ground for my mother's anxiety. I was the financial safety net they could secretly exploit while publicly dismissing. If I succeeded, my achievements were ignored because they threatened the carefully constructed narrative that Brianna was the superior daughter. If I set a firm boundary, I was instantly branded as cold and unforgiving. They desperately needed me to be the villain so they could continue playing the victims. Tonight, staring at this bright screen, the final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. My extended family did not actually love Brianna more than me. They loved what she represented. She was incredibly easy. She threw loud parties, offered free drinks, and demanded nothing but superficial praise in return. I, on the other hand, was a walking mirror reflecting their own profound mediocrity. My financial independence made them uncomfortable. My silence made them nervous. I closed the application and tossed the phone into my designer clutch. The sharp anger that had been boiling inside me evaporated, replaced by a profound icy clarity. I was no longer hurt by their cruel exclusion. You cannot be rejected by people you no longer respect. I moved to my vanity and applied a dark red lipstick. No more trying to earn a seat at a table built entirely on my own broken back. Xavier had explicitly told me my aesthetic was wrong for his lavish networking event. He was absolutely right. My aesthetic was raw power and his was a crumbling facade. I grabbed my keys and walked out the heavy oak door of my penthouse. The automated bank fraud alert was locked and loaded for 10:30. I had less than 2 hours to build the perfect stage at the apex. Tonight was not just about reclaiming my stolen $15,000. It was about absolute justice. It was about watching them burn down their own house of cards, and I possessed the only match. I stepped into the private elevator of my building, the heavy steel doors sliding shut and blocking out the quiet hum of my penthouse. Before I could even press the button for the lobby, my phone lit up brightly in my hand. It was an incoming call from Brianna. She had finally seen the text message I sent earlier, the one simply asking if she was enjoying the $15,000. I swiped the screen to answer and lifted the phone to my ear deliberately, not saying a single word. I wanted to hear her reaction. "Wow!" Riley. Brianna scoffed immediately. Her voice was loud and obnoxious, competing with the thumping bass of pop music and the clinking of expensive crystal glasses in the background. "You really cannot let anyone else have a single moment to shine, can you?" I kept my voice perfectly level. "You do know where that money came from, right, Brianna? It was not an extra party budget Mom had lying around. It was the emergency medical trust." Brianna let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that echoed through the phone. "Oh my gosh, stop being so dramatic. It is family money. And unlike you, I am actually doing something with my life that benefits the family image. You sit in a gray cubicle doing math all day. I am building a brand. I have nearly 1 million followers. I need this to look perfect." The sound of Xavier's voice boomed in the background, muffled but distinct. "Who is on the phone, babe? It is just—" Riley. Brianna replied to him, her tone dripping with mock pity. "She is having a massive meltdown because she is stuck at home while we are out here living our best lives." I could hear Xavier step closer to the phone. "Tell her to stop being so jealous of your success," he yelled, making sure his voice carried over the line. "If she actually worked harder, maybe she could afford a lifestyle like ours instead of constantly hating from the sidelines." A chorus of laughter erupted in the background. It sounded like my cousins and Aunt Martha joining in. "Did you hear that, Riley?" Brianna asked, giggling breathlessly. "Seriously, get a life. Or at least get a better job. Maybe then Mom would actually want to invite you to important things." Any other day, any other year, those words would have pierced right through my chest. But tonight, standing in my designer gown on the way to host the city's most powerful billionaires, her insults felt incredibly hollow. They were nothing more than the desperate flexes of people drowning in their own delusions. "Have a great night, Brianna," I said softly. "Enjoy the catering." I calmly hung up the phone. I did not yell back. I did not demand an apology. The elevator chimed as it reached the ground floor. I walked out of the luxury lobby and stepped into the waiting black luxury car I had ordered. I settled into the plush leather seat and pulled my work laptop out of my designer bag. The bright city lights blurred past the tinted windows as we merged onto the avenue. Xavier had just told me to stop being jealous of their success. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dark, quiet cabin. "Let us see how successful you really are," I said out loud to myself. I logged directly into the corporate financial database. Since I was a senior financial auditor, I had legal access to public and semi-private financial filings for tech companies seeking venture capital. Xavier had named his startup Elevate. It was marketed as a premium networking application for high-net-worth individuals. But the numbers staring back at me told a completely different horrifying story. I quickly scanned the balance sheets. He had burned through his initial seed funding in less than 8 months. Most of the capital was wasted on extravagant marketing campaigns, useless celebrity endorsements that yielded absolutely zero user retention, and leasing a massive corner office space he did not actually need. His customer acquisition cost was staggering, and his monthly recurring revenue was practically non-existent. The worst part was his liabilities. He had taken out massive predatory loans using his own personal equity as collateral. If he did not secure Series B funding within the next 30 days, Elevate would be forced into immediate bankruptcy, and his creditors would seize absolutely everything he owned. He was a man standing on the edge of a massive financial cliff, aggressively pretending he knew how to fly. This lavish birthday party was his desperate final gamble. He had invited prominent venture capitalists under the guise of a social event, hoping the grand illusion of wealth would convince them to write him a check. But venture capitalists do not write checks based on expensive balloon arches and premium open bars. They write checks based on data. And the data I was looking at proved Xavier was a complete and utter fraud. I closed the laptop just as the car pulled up to the private entrance of the Apex. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement. The doorman, dressed in an immaculate tailored suit, took one look at my confident demeanor and immediately unclipped the velvet rope. "Welcome to the Apex, Ms. Riley," he said smoothly. "Mr. Kensington and his guests are already waiting for you in the VIP lounge." I smiled, feeling the weight of the laptop bag on my shoulder. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the timer was ticking. Walking past the velvet rope, I stepped into the dimly lit mahogany-paneled elevator that shot me straight to the rooftop. The doors slid open to reveal the Apex in all its exclusive glory. No blaring pop music, no tacky neon signs. Just the soft hum of jazz, the clinking of heavy crystal tumblers, and the quiet murmur of people who actually controlled the city. I was directed to a secluded corner booth wrapped in black leather, offering a panoramic view of the glittering skyline. A waiter immediately placed a glass of sparkling water in front of me. I thanked him, set my designer bag on the leather seat, and pulled out my laptop one more time. I had glanced at Xavier's surface-level data in the car, but now, with a few minutes of quiet before Mr. Kensington and his guests arrived, I wanted the granular details. I routed my connection through my firm's encrypted server and pulled the preliminary term sheets for his Series B funding round. Xavier was not just seeking capital, he was begging for a lifeline. His burn rate was so astronomical that his company Elevate would default on its payroll obligations by the end of the month. But what caught my eye was the target investor list attached to his latest pitch deck. Xavier had listed Horizon Capital as his primary target for a $2 million cash injection. He had noted in his internal memos that tonight's extravagant party at the Crystal Ballroom was specifically designed to showcase Elevate's high-net-worth user base to Horizon's lead partner. He had rented a $15,000 venue, bought premium liquor, and hired professional photographers, all to impress one specific man. That man was Mr. Donovan. The exact same Mr. Donovan who was currently on his way up the elevator to have a drink with me. A cold smile touched my lips. Xavier was currently standing in a rented ballroom surrounded by my freeloading relatives, desperately checking the door for a billionaire who was never going to show up. He had banned me from his party because my aesthetic was wrong, completely unaware that I was the only person in the family who actually had Mr. Donovan on speed dial. Xavier was playing a high-stakes game of venture capital poker with a terrible hand, and he had just handed me the winning chips. I switched tabs on my browser, logging back into the bank's secure fraud portal. Earlier in my office, I had initiated the preliminary fraud alert. But a basic reversal might just bounce back a simple error code to the merchant. That was not enough. I wanted a catastrophic, undeniable financial freeze. I needed the bank to lock the funds mid-transaction, triggering an immediate stop payment to the venue's merchant account. I opened the supplementary documentation window and began drafting a formal, legally binding affidavit of unauthorized access. I cited the specific federal regulations regarding elder care trust exploitation. I attached my geo-tagged location data from the time the withdrawal was made, proving I was nowhere near the physical branch. Then I added a heavy-hitting corporate legal clause demanding an immediate freeze not only on the stolen $15,000, but on all accounts associated with the fraudulent signer. My mother had linked her personal checking account to the trust as a backup. By freezing the trust, her personal assets would be automatically locked pending investigation. I reviewed the documents with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. The bank's automated fraud department operated on strict chronological batches. If I locked this final aggressive report into the queue right now, the system would process the hard freeze at exactly 10:30 tonight, right when the catering staff at the Crystal Ballroom would be running the final authorization for the dinner service. Right when Xavier and Brianna would be at the peak of their arrogant celebration. I checked the time in the corner of my screen. It was almost 9:45. I dragged the cursor over the final submission button and clicked. A green checkmark appeared on the screen, accompanied by an automated reference number. The official fraud protocol was now locked in the banking mainframe. It could not be canceled, bypassed, or delayed. The $15,000 was officially flagged as stolen federal funds, and the countdown to absolute financial devastation had begun. I closed the laptop and slid it back into my bag, just as I heard the deep, booming laugh of Mr. Kensington approaching my booth. I picked up my crystal glass, adjusting my midnight blue silk gown, and made sure my posture was perfectly straight. I was absolutely ready to welcome the real power players of the city and show my family what true success actually looked like. "Riley, happy birthday!" The booming voice belonged to Richard Kensington as he rounded the corner of the VIP lounge. He was a towering figure in the venture capital world, known for his ruthless business acumen. Behind him walked two other men, both radiating effortless wealth. One of them I recognized immediately. It was Mr. Donovan, the exact lead partner at Horizon Capital that my brother-in-law was currently praying would walk through the doors of his tacky ballroom party. I stood up, offering a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Kensington. I appreciate you letting me use the lounge on such short notice." Kensington waved his hand dismissively. "Please, after you found that corporate tax loophole last quarter and saved my firm $4 million, you can have the keys to this place whenever you want. I was just telling Donovan here about your auditing work. Donovan, meet Riley, the sharpest financial mind in Manhattan." Mr. Donovan stepped forward, offering a warm smile. "It is a pleasure, Riley. Richard has not stopped singing your praises. Frankly, it is a massive relief to be sitting up here tonight instead of attending the alternative event I was supposed to endure." "Oh," I asked, feigning polite curiosity. "A bad alternative." Donovan let out a weary sigh. "Some desperate tech founder named Xavier has been hounding my office for weeks. He is running a sinking ship called Elevate. His cash burn rate is catastrophic, but instead of restructuring his debt, he decided to rent out a $15,000 venue across town tonight to host a fake networking gala. He actually thought I would show up to drink cheap champagne and hand him a $2 million lifeline based on a balloon arch and some social media influencers. It is insulting to my intelligence." The third man, an investor named Caldwell, laughed. "These amateur founders always think aesthetics can mask terrible balance sheets. They spend their absolute last dime trying to look rich instead of actually building equity." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, hiding the predatory smile that wanted to break across my face. They were absolutely right. Xavier was entirely focused on the illusion of wealth. He had banned me from his party for not fitting his desired aesthetic, while the very men he worshipped were currently sitting at my table mocking his existence. It was poetic justice. I could picture him sweating in his velvet tuxedo. "You know," I said smoothly, leaning back into the leather booth, "I actually audited the preliminary financial data for Elevate's market sector very recently. Their user acquisition strategy is fundamentally flawed from the ground up. They are targeting high net worth demographics without offering any proprietary security protocols. Their encryption standards are dangerously outdated. Any major tech player could easily replicate their model over a weekend and crush them entirely. Financing them would be exactly equivalent to throwing millions of dollars of capital into an open fire." Donovan leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. "Exactly. That is exactly what I told my analyst yesterday. Richard was entirely right about you, Riley. You see right through the marketing fluff and get straight to the numbers." For the next hour, the conversation flowed effortlessly over expensive wine and rare imported appetizers. We discussed global market trends, aggressive venture acquisitions, and strategic corporate restructuring methodologies. I was entirely in my element. These billionaires were not speaking to me out of pity or forced familial obligation. They were actively engaging with me because my intellect offered them tangible, undeniable value. I was not the silent family scapegoat waiting patiently for tiny scraps of emotional validation. I was the apex predator confidently holding court in the most exclusive, untouchable room in the entire city. As the evening progressed, Kensington raised his heavy crystal glass toward me, catching the dim ambient light of the lounge. To Riley he announced with genuine admiration, "A brilliant corporate auditor, a ruthless strategic mastermind, and a woman who clearly knows how to celebrate a birthday milestone with the absolute right crowd. Cheers to your continued dominance." We clinked our glasses together. The crystal chimed softly, a beautiful contrast to the chaotic reality I knew was unfolding across town. I casually glanced down at my silver watch. It was exactly 10:15. In precisely 15 minutes, the automated banking algorithm would execute my fraud report. The stolen funds would be instantly frozen, the venue would immediately cut off their services, and the glamorous fake facade my mother and sister had built would violently collapse. I looked back at Donovan, offering him a serene, victorious smile. "Thank you, gentlemen. I already know this is going to be the most rewarding year of my entire life." I excused myself from the leather booth, leaving the three billionaires deep in a discussion about overseas asset allocation. Walking toward the edge of the rooftop terrace, I let the cool night breeze brush against my face. I looked down at the sprawling grid of city lights below. Somewhere in that maze of traffic and neon was the Crystal Ballroom. Somewhere down there, Xavier was sweating through his velvet tuxedo, checking his phone every 5 seconds, and wondering why the masters of the universe were completely ignoring him. It was 10:18. The automated fraud reversal was 12 minutes away. Having Mr. Donovan and Mr. Kensington in my corner was a phenomenal start, but my brother-in-law had spent the last 2 years mocking my career, calling me a low-level corporate drone who could never understand the high-stakes world of technology startups. If I was going to dismantle his entire fake empire tonight, I did not just want an audience of 3, I wanted a sold-out arena. I opened my designer clutch and pulled out my phone. Throughout my years as a senior auditor, I had not just analyzed spreadsheets. I had built an ironclad network. When you are the person who discovers the hidden financial liabilities that save massive conglomerates from catastrophic mergers, people remember your name. When you quietly fix the tax errors that would otherwise land prominent executives in federal prison, you earn favors. It was time to cash them in. I drafted a sleek, minimalist digital invitation. I titled it, "The Apex Midnight Syndicate." In the description, I simply wrote that I was hosting an impromptu birthday celebration alongside Richard Kensington and Thomas Donovan, and we were discussing the upcoming quarter's venture capital allocations. No balloons, no desperate pleas for funding, just raw, unfiltered influence. I bypassed the standard contact list and opened my encrypted corporate directory. I selected the top 50 names. These were the managing directors of the largest tech incubators, the angel investors who wrote 7-figure checks before breakfast, and the media executives who controlled the tech industry narrative. They were the exact people Xavier had begged, harassed, and ultimately failed to get into his tacky $15,000 ballroom. I hit send. For exactly 30 seconds, the phone remained completely silent. I stood by the glass railing watching the headlights move along the avenue below. Then the first notification appeared. It was the CEO of a major cloud storage company. RSVP confirmed. 5 seconds later, another notification. The lead partner of an international hedge fund. RSVP confirmed. Suddenly, my phone screen turned into a waterfall of green alerts. RSVP confirmed. RSVP confirmed. RSVP confirmed. The tension in my chest transformed into pure electrifying adrenaline. The city's absolute elite were abandoning their Friday night dinner reservations, leaving their private galas, and directing their drivers straight to the apex. They were coming because power attracts power, and right now I was holding the largest magnet in Manhattan. I walked back into the main lounge. The atmosphere was already shifting. The elevator doors chimed, opening to reveal the first wave of my guests. A prominent software developer walked in instantly, recognizing Kensington and walking straight toward our booth. Then came two executives from a massive social media conglomerate. The lounge management, realizing what was happening, immediately dispatched extra servers carrying trays of their finest vintage champagne and rare caviar appetizers. Riley Kensington called out, a wide grin spreading across his face as he shook hands with a newly arrived tech giant. "I thought you said this was a small gathering. You just summoned half the Forbes list with a single text message." I smiled, accepting a fresh glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. "I just thought it would be a shame to keep all this good advice to ourselves," I replied smoothly. By 10:25, the private rooftop was packed with billionaires, visionaries, and industry titans. The air buzzed with the kind of high-level negotiations that literally changed the global market. There was no tacky background music, no screaming influencers, and absolutely no fake aesthetics. The men and women in this room wore bespoke suits and understated designer dresses. This was the real world, and I had built it from the ground up with my own intellect and absolute dedication. I stood near the center of the room, surrounded by people who respected my mind and valued my presence. My phone buzzed again, but this time, it was not an RSVP. It was a calendar alert. 10:30, the exact moment my automated fraud report was scheduled to hit the banking mainframe. Across the city, the invisible gears of the federal banking system began to turn, locking onto the stolen $15,000 and preparing to rip the floor right out from under my family. The clock on my phone switched from 10:29 to 10:30. The automated system executed the financial freeze with digital perfection. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and took a deep breath, stepping away from the crowded lounge and walking out onto the expansive glass terrace. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the warm, buzzing energy inside. The general manager of the Apex, a distinguished older man in a tailored tuxedo, immediately materialized at my side. He held a silver tray with a fresh glass of sparkling water. "Is everything to your liking tonight, Ms. Riley?" he asked respectfully. "The chef is preparing the hors d'oeuvres specifically for your table." "Everything is absolutely perfect," I replied, offering him a warm smile. "Thank you for accommodating us so flawlessly." He bowed his head very slightly. "It is always our pleasure to host you." I walked to the edge of the terrace and rested my hands on the thick glass railing. The city sprawled out below me like a massive glowing grid. Up here, the atmosphere was defined by quiet, powerful money. There was no need to shout to be heard. There were no rented neon signs or tacky balloon arches designed to manufacture the illusion of wealth. The billionaires inside did not need to post their every move on social media because they were the ones who actually owned the platforms. The contrast between my current reality and the pathetic, loud desperation of Brianna's $15,000 party was staggering. Looking at the headlights moving along the dark pavement, my mind drifted back to a different time. I was 22 years old, exhausted to my very core, and studying for my certified public accountant exams. While my peers were resting in warm beds, I was spending my nights curled up in the back seat of a heavily used, freezing sedan, parked under a flickering street lamp. I was sleeping in my car because my mother Beatrice had officially kicked me out of the house without warning. Her reasoning was not that I had done something wrong. Her reasoning was that Brianna, who was 19 at the time, had accumulated too many designer clothes and desperately needed a walk-in closet. My childhood bedroom, the only safe space I had ever known, was systematically emptied out and remodeled to house my sister's shoe collection. I remembered the biting cold of those winter nights. I remembered studying massive textbooks by the dim yellow glow of a battery-powered flashlight, my fingers completely numb. I remembered the deep, aching pain in my spine from sleeping across an uneven back seat. And I remembered calling my mother, begging her to let me sleep on the living room sofa, just for the week of my final exams. She had flatly refused. She told me that having a messy college student sleeping on the couch would ruin the aesthetic of the house and cause Brianna unnecessary stress. Those nights in that freezing car could have easily broken me. They were designed to break me. My family wanted me to fail so they could justify their cruelty, so they could look down on me and feel superior in their unearned comfort. But they severely underestimated the profound clarity that comes from hitting absolute rock bottom. I did not break. Every shivering night, every rejected plea for help, and every tear I wiped away in the dark became the steel foundation of the empire I was going to build. The cold forged my ambition into a weapon. I passed my accounting exams on the first try with the highest score in my state. I secured a lucrative position at a top-tier firm, climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency, and never asked them for a single dime. I became untouchable. A gentle tap on my shoulder pulled me out of the memories. I turned around to see Mr. Donovan standing on the terrace holding a glass of rare scotch. "You threw one hell of a party, Riley," he said, looking out at the skyline beside me. I have not seen this many heavy hitters in the same room since the Global Tech Summit last year. Everyone is highly impressed. I smiled, the cold memories fading away as the reality of my triumph settled in. "They are here because they know the difference between real value and a cheap facade," I replied. Donovan nodded in agreement. "Speaking of which, Kensington wants to get a photo of the three of us before the night gets too chaotic. He wants to commemorate the evening." "I would love nothing more than to take that photo right now," I said. I smiled and happily followed him back inside. The trap I set was about to snap completely shut. Stepping back into the warm, ambient light of the main lounge, the energy had magnified significantly. The room was now comfortably filled with the city's most formidable financial minds. Kensington was holding court near a massive marble fireplace, surrounded by a group of newly arrived venture capitalists and tech executives. Donovan and I approached the circle just as a prominent media mogul asked Donovan why he had suddenly altered his Friday evening schedule to be here. Donovan let out a rich, echoing laugh and swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I was originally supposed to be at a different event tonight," he explained to the group, his tone dripping with wealthy amusement. "Some desperate tech founder named Xavier has been flooding my assistant's inbox for a month. He practically begged me to attend some tacky influencer party for his wife at a rented ballroom across town. He promised me premium aesthetics and a revolution in high-net-worth networking." The group of executives groaned collectively, shaking their heads at the sheer audacity of amateur founders. "I had my analyst pull his public filings this morning." Donovan continued, completely unaware that he was talking about my brother-in-law. "The guy is running on fumes. His burn rate is catastrophic. But instead of restructuring, he spends $15,000 on balloon arches and cheap champagne, hoping to trick me into handing him a $2 million lifeline. I chose to come here instead to talk real business with Riley. At least she respects my time and actually understands a balance sheet." I smirked, catching Donovan's eye as the group chuckled in agreement. "Aesthetics cannot mask a negative cash flow," I added smoothly. "The market always corrects a fake valuation." "Exactly," Kensington boomed, slapping his hand warmly against Donovan's shoulder. "And speaking of correcting valuations, let us get that picture before this room gets any more crowded. Hey Marcus, get over here and take a photo of the three of us." Kensington waved over the house photographer, a discreet professional who documented high-profile gatherings at the apex. I stepped between Kensington and Donovan, standing tall in my midnight blue silk gown. There were no forced smiles, no ridiculous poses designed to manufacture fake joy for a social media feed. We simply stood there projecting the quiet, undeniable confidence of people who held real leverage. The camera flashed brilliantly against the dim lighting of the lounge, capturing the exact moment I officially stepped out of my family's shadow and into my own power. Kensington had the photographer immediately airdrop the high-resolution image directly to my phone. I thanked both men and stepped away from the crowded fireplace for a brief moment to craft the perfect digital strike. I walked over to a quiet corner booth, opened my phone, and navigated to both my professional network profile and my personal social media account. I uploaded the pristine professional photograph. The caption needed to be precise, devastating, and entirely factual. I typed carefully, celebrating my 33rd birthday at the apex with the real architects of the tech world. Thank you, Richard Kensington and Thomas Donovan, for an incredible evening of strategic vision. Real value is built on solid data, not rented aesthetics. Then came the critical move. I tapped the tag feature. I did not just tag the two billionaires standing next to me. I specifically searched for the corporate page of Elevate Xavier's failing startup and tagged it directly on Mr. Donovan's lapel. Next, I found Brianna's public influencer profile and tagged her directly in the background. I wanted to ensure that the moment they checked their notifications to see how many people were liking their fake glamorous lifestyle, they would be hit with a digital missile. I pressed publish. The post was live. I slid the phone back into my designer clutch, feeling a profound, chilling sense of calm wash over my entire body. It was 10:32. The automated fraud alert had already engaged deep within the federal banking mainframe. My stolen $15,000 was currently being frozen, ripped away from the merchant account of the Crystal Ballroom. I rejoined the party, picking up a fresh glass of sparkling water from a passing silver tray. For the next 20 minutes, I engaged in brilliant rapid-fire conversations with chief executive officers and hedge fund managers. One software magnate even quietly offered me a highly lucrative board seat on his upcoming public offering. I was actively securing my financial future, cementing my legacy among the elite, while simultaneously waiting for the inevitable collapse of the people who had tried to ruin me. The fuse was lit, the trap was fully sprung, and across the city the music was about to stop. The waiter approached our table carrying a silver ice bucket that held a bottle of vintage champagne. I recognized the gold foil label immediately. It was a $500 bottle, the exact premium tier Xavier had bragged about wanting to serve at his party, but simply could not afford without maxing out his remaining credit cards. Kensington grabbed the heavy bottle himself, popping the cork with a loud celebratory crack that echoed perfectly over the low, sophisticated hum of the lounge. "Let us make a proper toast to Riley Kensington," announced cheerfully, pouring the sparkling golden liquid into my tall crystal flute. "To the sharpest mind in the room and the best birthday celebration this rooftop has seen all year." I raised my glass, the crystal catching the ambient light, and took a slow sip. It tasted like absolute victory. I set the glass down softly on the mahogany table and discreetly checked my phone. The digital missile I had launched just minutes ago was already detonating across the internet with spectacular speed. LinkedIn is a highly sensitive and ruthless ecosystem. When a senior financial auditor posts a high-resolution picture standing shoulder to shoulder with two of the most elusive, powerful billionaires in the country, the algorithm notices immediately. But when you specifically tag a struggling, desperate tech startup in that exact same picture, the platform aggressively pushes the post to anyone connected to that company's network. I watched the analytics spike in real time, the view count climbing by the hundreds every few seconds. Tagging Xavier's company Elevate was not just a petty jab. It was a highly calculated strategic execution. I knew Xavier had custom digital alerts set up on his phone for any mention of his brand. He was entirely obsessed with his public image. He spent half his day refreshing his social feeds, desperately searching for any sign of viral traction or investor interest. I had just given him the exact traction he wanted, but in the absolute worst way imaginable. A female executive from a major corporate analytics firm walked over to our booth holding her phone with a highly amused expression. "Riley," she said, pointing a manicured finger at her screen. "I just saw your post. Brilliant photo and you look stunning, but why on earth did you tag Elevate? My team audited their user data last month and their revenue projections are a complete disaster. Nobody is touching them." I took another sip of my expensive champagne and smiled warmly at her. "Consider it a public service announcement," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "I am doing a real-time case study on the profound dangers of prioritizing aesthetics over actual revenue. I figured the industry could use a clear visual representation of what happens when a founder tries to fake his way to the top while ignoring fundamental accounting principles." The executive laughed loudly, shaking her head in agreement. "Well, you definitely have the entire industry's attention right now. My feed is completely blowing up with comments from venture capitalists asking why Donovan is hanging out with you instead of attending Elevate's so-called exclusive gala tonight. The rumor mill is already spinning. People are saying Elevate is officially dead in the water if Donovan passed on their big networking event." I swiped over to my Instagram application. The cross-posted photo was gaining massive traction there too. Several prominent luxury brands and high-end lifestyle magazines that Brianna had been desperately trying to secure as sponsors were actively liking my photo. They recognized Donovan and Kensington from the Forbes lists. By proxy, they were recognizing me as the true center of influence. Brianna had spent $15,000 of my stolen money to construct a fake reality where she was important, but she could not buy the one thing I had just effortlessly commanded: genuine, undeniable industry respect. The digital trap was now fully secured. I had publicly aligned myself with the exact capital Xavier needed to survive, and I had permanently locked him out of the room. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the physical reality to catch up to the digital exposure. For 33 years, I had played the obedient scapegoat. I had absorbed their insults, funded their mistakes, and allowed them to dictate my worth. But looking around this room, feeling the heavy crystal in my hand, and seeing the respect in the eyes of industry titans, I knew that version of me was permanently dead. I was no longer the punching bag for a narcissistic mother and a spoiled sister. I was the architect of my own destiny, and I was about to teach them a master class in consequences. I looked at the digital clock on my phone screen. It was 10:40. The bank's automated fraud department had already locked the Eldercare Trust Fund. The reversal protocol was currently moving swiftly through the merchant processing system. I leaned back against the plush leather booth, letting the rich taste of the champagne linger on my tongue. I imagined the exact moment the general manager at the Crystal Ballroom would receive the critical notification on his tablet. I imagined the absolute horror on my mother's face when she realized the $15,000 payment for the evening had just been flagged as federal wire fraud and aggressively pulled back by the bank. The federal banking infrastructure is not a system of emotion or leniency. It does not care about social media aesthetics, influencer follower counts, or carefully planned birthday milestones. It operates entirely on cold, hard mathematics and rigid legal protocols. When the clock had struck 10:30, my scheduled fraud report bypassed the standard local branch reviews and was injected directly into the central processing mainframe. As a senior financial auditor, I knew the exact mechanics of what was happening behind the scenes. The algorithms immediately identified the forged signature on the Eldercare Trust Fund and matched it against the geolocation data I had provided. The system recognized a critical violation of federal banking security. I took another slow sip of the vintage champagne, letting my mind trace the exact digital journey of that stolen $15,000. Once a transaction of that size is flagged for suspected federal wire fraud, the automated clearinghouse system initiates a mandatory 90-minute investigative lock. During this 90-minute window, the receiving institution, which in this case was the merchant bank representing the Crystal Ballroom, is legally forced to freeze the pending deposit. They are required to hold the funds in a secure escrow state before aggressively pulling the money back to the original victim account. My mother and sister were currently dancing in a beautiful, extravagant ballroom they no longer had the money to rent. They were drinking premium liquor that was essentially unpaid for. While the invisible digital clock ticked down toward midnight, the atmosphere at the apex only grew more electric and refined. Kensington and Donovan guided me over to a group of international commercial real estate developers. These were men who managed billions of dollars in metropolitan assets, and they were actively looking for an independent auditor with a ruthless eye for corporate discrepancies. I stepped into their high-level discussion, effortlessly dissecting a recent zoning tax liability that had been making headlines in the financial papers. I explained exactly how the holding company had misclassified their depreciation assets to hide a massive cash flow deficit. The developers listened to me with absolute rapt attention. I did not have to pretend to be someone I was not. I did not have to shrink myself down to make anyone else feel bigger or more secure. For the first time in my entire adult life, I was existing entirely on my own terms, surrounded by individuals who actually understood the language of success. The contrast between my current reality and the toxic environment I had grown up in was incredibly stark. Growing up, my mother Beatrice had actively conditioned me to believe that my core value was intrinsically tied to my usefulness to Brianna. If I was not actively sacrificing my time, my hard-earned money, or my personal comfort to elevate my sister, I was deemed a selfish failure. My family treated my boundaries as personal attacks and my achievements as inconvenient distractions. But standing on this luxurious rooftop, holding a crystal glass, and commanding the respect of billionaires, I realized a profound truth. My family had not underestimated me because I was weak. They had suppressed me because they knew exactly how strong I could become if I ever stopped carrying their dead weight. They needed me to stay small so they could feel giant. I discreetly checked the digital clock on my phone screen once more. It was approaching 11:15. The 90-minute automated window was closing fast. At exactly midnight, the general manager at the Crystal Ballroom would receive an automated administrative alert on his merchant point-of-sale terminal. The bright red notification would state that the primary payment method had been forcibly rejected and reversed due to reported fraudulent activity. The venue management would have absolutely no choice but to halt all hospitality services immediately to prevent any further financial losses. They would instruct the DJ to cut the music. They would order the catering staff to clear the tables and lock up the premium alcohol. And most importantly, they would pull Beatrice and Xavier aside to demand immediate alternative payment. They would demand a fresh $15,000 swipe from Xavier, a man who did not even have enough liquid capital in his accounts to cover a standard bar tab. I smiled and accepted a delicate caviar appetizer from a passing waiter. I looked out over the glittering city skyline, feeling the cool night breeze against my face. The champagne tasted sweeter with every single passing minute. The countdown to absolute midnight had officially begun, and the impending financial explosion across town was going to be nothing short of spectacular. I excused myself from the group of real estate developers, claiming I needed to make a brief phone call. I stepped into a quiet hallway just off the main lounge of the Apex and pulled my phone from my clutch. I did not need to physically be at the Crystal Ballroom to witness the disaster unfolding. Brianna was an influencer whose entire self-worth was tied to her digital broadcast. I opened her social media profile and tapped on her active live stream. The glowing ring around her profile picture indicated she was still desperately trying to project an image of success to her followers. But the reality captured by the camera lens told a completely different story. The grand ballroom, which had looked so imposing and glamorous just an hour ago, now looked painfully empty. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, and the white silk draped elegantly across the ceiling, but the energy in the room was entirely dead. The professional photographer they had hired for the evening was leaning heavily against a marble pillar, looking bored as he aimlessly scrolled through his own phone. There was absolutely nobody important left to photograph. The extended family members who had eagerly devoured the free appetizers were now sitting slumped in their chairs waiting for the main course so they could finally leave. Brianna stepped into the frame, and her carefully curated aesthetic was rapidly crumbling. Her perfect blonde hair looked disheveled, and her smile was completely gone, replaced by a deep scowl. She was not talking to her followers anymore. She had forgotten she was still streaming, or she simply did not care. She was throwing an absolute tantrum, her voice echoing shrilly across the empty dance floor. She was aggressively cornering our mother Beatrice, waving her arms in frustration. None of the beauty influencers she had invited had shown up. The local lifestyle magazine editors had ghosted her. She had spent $15,000 on a backdrop, but the actual audience consisted of Aunt Martha and Uncle David. "This is a complete disaster, Mom," Brianna whined loudly, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I promised my sponsors I would have high-level engagement tonight. I bought the premium floral arrangements and the custom lighting. Where is everyone? This makes me look like a total amateur." Beatrice tried to soothe her, patting her arm and offering empty reassurances about how beautiful the room looked. But empty reassurances do not pay the bills, and they certainly do not generate social media engagement. Brianna pushed her mother's hand away, her face red with fury. In the background of the live stream, pacing near the extravagant open bar, was Xavier. He looked absolutely terrible. He had taken off his velvet tuxedo jacket and tossed it carelessly onto a nearby chair. The collar of his crisp white shirt was unbuttoned, and he was sweating profusely. He was gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles were white, aggressively refreshing his inbox and checking his text messages every few seconds. He was a man watching his entire future evaporate right in front of his eyes. Xavier had banked his entire company's survival on this specific evening. He had sent out countless emails, leveraged every single connection he had, and made massive promises to venture capitalists like Mr. Donovan. He had assured them that this party would be a revolutionary networking event where the city's most elite minds would gather. But the elite minds were currently standing a few miles away on a private rooftop with me drinking vintage champagne. Xavier had been entirely ghosted. The investors had seen right through his cheap facade and chosen to ignore him completely. I watched as Xavier abruptly turned away from the bar and marched over to Brianna. Even through the distorted audio of the stream, I could hear the raw panic in his voice. He demanded to know why none of her high-profile friends had arrived. He told her she had wasted thousands of dollars on a useless party that was actively destroying his professional reputation. Brianna immediately fired back, blaming him for failing to secure the right guests. The golden couple who had spent the last 2 years mocking my career were now publicly tearing each other apart. I smiled and locked my phone screen, sliding the device back into my bag. I did not need to watch anymore. The psychological collapse was already in full swing, driven entirely by their own arrogance. And the best part was that the actual financial collapse had not even hit them yet. They were arguing over social status, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up and swallow them whole. I turned around and walked confidently back into the vibrant atmosphere of the apex. It was 11:45. The midnight hour was rapidly approaching. I found a quiet alcove near the sprawling glass windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. While the venture capitalists continued to network behind me, I pulled my phone from my clutch one more time. I reopened Brianna's social media profile. The live stream was still running, though the viewer count had plummeted. Brianna was still aggressively complaining to our mother, her voice completely hoarse from yelling about the lack of important guests. But my focus was entirely on Xavier. He was aggressively swiping through his email application, his face tight with desperation. Suddenly, the screen of his phone illuminated with a bright push notification. Even through the compressed video quality, I recognized the distinct blue banner of a LinkedIn alert. He had set up custom notifications to alert him instantly whenever his failing startup Elevate was mentioned anywhere on the internet. He was desperately praying for an angel investor to mention his brand. Instead, he got me. I watched closely as Xavier tapped the notification. He brought the phone closer to his face, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Then the realization hit him. I saw the blood drain completely from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His shoulders dropped and his mouth fell slightly open. He stood frozen in the middle of the empty dance floor, staring at the high-resolution photograph of me standing shoulder to shoulder with Richard Kensington and Thomas Donovan. He zoomed in on the image, his fingers trembling slightly. He recognized Mr. Donovan instantly. This was the exact billionaire he had built this entire fake gala to impress. He also recognized Mr. Kensington, a man whose mere presence could secure unlimited funding for any startup. And standing right between them, holding a $500 glass of vintage champagne and wearing a custom-tailored designer gown, was the woman he had banned from his party just 3 hours earlier for supposedly wearing cheap corporate suits. Xavier did not just look shocked. He suddenly realized that his boring auditor sister-in-law was not a low-level corporate drone. She was the gatekeeper to the exact room he was locked out of. "Brianna, look at this!" Xavier yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic. He sprinted across the ballroom, completely ignoring the few remaining relatives who were staring at him. He shoved his way past my mother and aggressively shoved the phone screen directly into Brianna's face. "Look at your sister right now." Brianna stopped her tantrum mid-sentence, blinking against the bright screen. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dripping with immediate disgust. "Why is Riley wearing a designer dress? Where is she? Did she rent a studio to take fake photos? Because she is jealous of my party." Xavier let out a harsh, hysterical laugh that echoed loudly across the ballroom. "Fake photos, Brianna. She is at the apex. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get into that building? And look at the men she is standing with. That is Thomas Donovan, the lead partner at Horizon Capital, the exact man I needed to meet tonight to save my company from total bankruptcy. And your sister is drinking champagne with him like they are old friends." Beatrice leaned over to look at the screen, her eyes narrowing. "That cannot be right," my mother muttered defensively. "Riley does not know billionaires. She just crunches numbers in a cubicle. She probably sneaked in to take a photo to ruin your special day. She tagged my company." Xavier screamed, his voice echoing off the chandeliers. "Do you not understand what this means? She is actively hosting the most powerful investors in the city. The exact people who refused to show up here tonight are currently at her party, and we specifically told her she was not welcome here because she did not fit your stupid aesthetic. We just insulted the only person who could actually save my entire business." Brianna stared at the phone screen, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the profound jealousy and confusion contorting her face. For her entire life, she had believed she was the absolute pinnacle of success in our family. But looking at that photograph, the harsh, undeniable reality finally pierced through her delusion. She saw me radiating genuine power, surrounded by true wealth, completely unbothered by her existence. I quietly watched Xavier drag his hands down his face, his chest heaving with panic. He grabbed his velvet tuxedo jacket from the chair and frantically began typing a text message. I knew exactly who he was desperately trying to contact. I smiled, closed the live stream application, and locked my phone screen. The digital devastation had landed perfectly, and the automated bank clock was now only 10 minutes away from striking midnight. I had barely slipped my phone back into my designer clutch when it began to vibrate aggressively against the silk lining. I did not even need to check the bright caller identification screen to know exactly who was trying to reach me. The digital missile I had launched just moments ago had successfully detonated, and the resulting shockwave had finally hit my mother. I walked further down the quiet, softly illuminated hallway of the Apex to ensure I had complete privacy, and confidently answered, "Riley, what are you doing?" Beatrice screamed the second the connection was made. Her voice was shrill, abandoning her faked composed tone. "Xavier just showed us your post. How dare you steal your sister's guests?" I leaned against the glass wall. "I did not steal anyone." "Mom," I replied calmly, "I simply sent an invitation. They chose to come here because I actually have something valuable to offer them." "Do not play smart with me," Beatrice snapped. You knew how important tonight was for Brianna and Xavier. He has been trying to meet Thomas Donovan for months. Instead of helping your family, you maliciously lure him to a rooftop bar to ruin your sister's day. You are bitterly jealous. You are going to apologize to them and send those men to the Crystal Ballroom right now. Xavier needs them immediately. The sheer audacity of her demand hung heavily in the air. For 33 years, whenever they dug themselves into a hole, I was expected to pull them out only to be kicked back into the dirt. Tonight, the rules had permanently changed. "Mom," I said, radiating a freezing authority that forced her to stop yelling. "Listen to me. I am the host of this gathering. The men in the next room control billions in global assets. They did not come to look at balloon arches or drink alcohol paid for by stolen money. They came because I am a senior financial auditor who protects their wealth. They respect my intellect and my relentless work ethic. They value the reality of my achievements, not a manufactured illusion." Beatrice tried to interrupt, but I completely cut her off. "You told me my corporate suits did not fit the aesthetic of Brianna's party," I continued. "You told me I would embarrass the family in front of Xavier's investors. Well, the investors are standing next to me right now, and they are laughing at Xavier. They pulled his financial records this morning. They know his startup is practically bankrupt and that he is a complete fraud. No amount of premium floral arrangements will convince them to hand him a $2 million check. But you are family," Beatrice pleaded, her tone shifting to desperate begging. "Riley, please. Xavier is in a panic and Brianna is humiliated. If you bring Mr. Donovan here for 10 minutes, it could change everything. You have the power to fix this. Do not be selfish." "Selfish," I repeated, letting out a sharp laugh. "You forged my signature on a federal document to drain $15,000 from an emergency medical fund. You stole my money to throw a party I was banned from attending. You used my financial security to fund a fake lifestyle. And now you want me to cash in my professional reputation to bail you out." I took a deep breath. "I am not your safety net anymore, Mom. I am not the family scapegoat. I earned my seat at this table through years of exhausting work, while you and Brianna mocked every step I took. I will not let you use my connections to bail out her fake life. You wanted to play in the big leagues. Welcome to the big leagues." Before Beatrice could utter another single desperate word or launch into another manipulative tirade, I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I did not block her number yet. I wanted the line open for the final act. I stood there and stared at the dark screen, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound liberation. I had finally severed the toxic cord that bound me to their dysfunction. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and smoothed the front of my silk gown. Letting the luxury of the hallway wash over me, I walked confidently back into the vibrant, crowded lounge. Mr. Kensington caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass in a respectful toast. I smiled and nodded. I checked the digital clock on my phone. It was 11:55. The automated banking system was 5 minutes away from executing the final phase of my plan. I walked straight over to the marble bar, ordered a fresh glass of sparkling water, and patiently prepared to watch the midnight fireworks. Standing at the marble bar, I watched the bartender carefully slice a lemon for my sparkling water. The jazz music swelled as the clock shifted to 11:56. The lounge vibrated with the energy of high-level negotiations. A tranquil silence had finally settled inside my chest. I took my drink and turned back toward the panoramic windows overlooking the glittering city. My phone vibrated sharply against the silk fabric of my clutch. I pulled it out and looked down at the bright screen, expecting another furious paragraph from my mother Beatrice. Instead, the sender name flashing on the screen was Xavier. The notification preview showed a block of text so frantic it barely resembled his usual curated communication style. I unlocked the device and opened the thread. The man who had spent the last 2 years mocking my career, insulting my corporate wardrobe, and explicitly banning me from his $15,000 event was now practically on his knees begging for help. "Riley Sis, please tell me you are still at the apex." The message began, the sheer desperation bleeding through the pixels. "I know things got heated earlier tonight, but we are family. We have to always look out for each other. You know exactly how hard I have been working on Elevate. This Series B funding is absolutely everything to me. Brianna and I are packing up the car right now. We can be at your building in 12 minutes. Can you please get me in just for 10 minutes with Thomas Donovan? Just one introduction, Riley. I will owe you for the rest of my life. Please. I stared at the glowing words, a bitter cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. Sis. He had never once called me sis in the 2 years he had been legally married to my sister. From the exact moment he entered our family dynamic, he eagerly adopted my mother's toxic hierarchy. He recognized immediately that Brianna was the golden child, and I was the designated punching bag. He actively participated in my deliberate exclusion to earn favor with Beatrice. He constantly mocked my financial prudence to elevate his own reckless spending habits. Just hours ago, he happily stood in a ballroom paid for by my stolen funds and laughed while my sister called me a failure. But the moment his back was pushed aggressively against the wall, the narrative completely shifted. The moment he realized the person he had been stepping on held the keys to the kingdom, suddenly we were family. It was the predictable battle cry of the parasite who finally realizes the host is walking away. I looked over my shoulder into the crowded lounge. Across the room, Thomas Donovan was deep in a lively conversation with Richard Kensington. These men were undisputed titans of industry. They built massive global empires based on trust, verifiable data, and relentless competence. Xavier possessed none of those things. He was a rapidly sinking ship, demanding that I throw my own hard-earned professional reputation overboard just to save him from drowning. If I introduced a verifiable fraud like Xavier to a billionaire like Donovan, it would permanently destroy my own credibility. Xavier only cared about saving his aesthetic. I tapped the reply box on my screen. I did not type out an emotional paragraph. Narcissists do not process emotional explanations. They only process raw power and the denial of access. My fingers moved swiftly across the digital keyboard, crafting the exact final nail for his professional coffin. I chose to use the very words he had sent me earlier in the evening. Sorry, I typed, my face illuminated by the harsh white light. My cheap corporate suit does not fit the aesthetic of your business model. Have a great night. I pressed send. I watched the tiny blue indicator show that the message had been successfully delivered. I imagined him standing in the middle of that painfully empty ballroom, reading those exact words, and realizing that his final lifeline had just been permanently severed. Before he could type another frantic reply, I tapped his profile icon, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and pressed block caller. The screen refreshed immediately, confirming that Xavier was permanently locked out of my digital life. He could no longer call, text, or demand anything from me. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy, but it was not the suffocating silence of oppression I had known my entire life. It was the profoundly liberating silence of total control. I slipped the phone back into my clutch. The minute hand on the massive clock clicked forward with a heavy thud. It was 11:59. I turned back toward the sweeping view of Manhattan, took a deep breath, and waited for midnight. The vintage clock above the marble bar struck midnight with a resonant chime that seemed to echo through my bones. While across the city my family faced the catastrophic reality of their stolen funds freezing, my reality was moving in the exact opposite direction. The music swelled and the energy shifted from casual networking to serious propositioning. I turned away from the windows and walked back toward the center of the room. Richard Kensington was waiting near the fireplace, holding 2 fresh glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me with a wide, approving smile. Riley, he began, his voice dropping to a more professional, confidential register. I have been watching you operate tonight. The way you handled those real estate developers, the way you effortlessly commanded the room. It is nothing short of exceptional. Thank you, Mr. Kensington, I replied, taking a sip from the glass. I learned from the best. He chuckled, shaking his head. No, you brought something entirely your own to the table. Our firm is restructuring our senior leadership next quarter. I want you to step out of the senior auditor role. I am offering you the position of Managing Director of Financial Compliance. It comes with full equity partnership, a corner office, and a significant salary increase. You have outgrown your current title, and I refuse to let a competitor poach you. I stood there, the weight of his words settling over me like a warm mantle. Full equity partnership was the holy grail of corporate finance. It was the exact level of success my mother insisted I could never achieve without her guidance or a wealthy husband. I accept, I said, firmly extending my hand. I am truly ready. Kensington grasped my hand with a very firm, respectful shake. Good, we will draw up the paperwork on Monday. Before we could even finish celebrating the promotion, Thomas Donovan approached us, his sharp eyes crinkling at the corners. Not so fast, Richard Donovan said, stepping into our circle. You cannot monopolize all of her time. Riley, my venture capital firm is launching a new incubator fund next month, specifically targeting high-security data infrastructure. We need an independent consultant who can rip apart balance sheets and spot fraudulent valuations before we commit capital. I want you on retainer. The contract will be highly lucrative and you can manage it alongside your new partnership here. I looked at Donovan, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. He was essentially handing me the keys to his billion-dollar investment portfolio. This was the exact contract my brother-in-law Xavier had been praying to secure, the exact lifeline he desperately needed to save his crumbling empire. And Donovan was handing it to me unprompted, simply because he recognized my inherent value. I would be absolutely thrilled to consult for your new fund, Mr. Donovan, I answered, shaking his hand. I will have my legal team draft a preliminary retainer agreement by Tuesday morning. Excellent, Donovan said, raising his glass. To the future. I raised my glass in return, but as I looked at the two men standing in front of me, a profound emotional shift occurred deep within my chest. For my entire life, I had been desperately seeking validation from a mother who viewed me as a walking ATM, and a sister who viewed me as a stepping stone. I had spent decades trying to twist myself into a shape that they would finally accept, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same pride they freely showered upon Brianna. But standing in this room, surrounded by industry titans who valued my intellect, my integrity, and my relentless work ethic, I finally understood the truth. Family is not simply defined by shared genetics or legal documents. Family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the genuine desire to see you succeed. Richard Kensington and Thomas Donovan had mentored me, challenged me, and elevated me. They were my chosen family. The men and women in this room were my peers. They did not care about fake social media aesthetics or rented ballroom extravagance. They cared about substance. They cared about the real, undeniable value I brought to the world. The heavy, suffocating need for my biological family's approval completely evaporated. It was as if a massive physical weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I no longer needed Beatrice to tell me I was good enough. I no longer needed Brianna to validate my existence. I had built my own kingdom brick by brick, and I was the only person who held the keys. I stood and took a deep breath of the crisp, expensive air. The trap across town had finally and officially snapped completely shut, right on schedule. At exactly midnight, while I was being offered the keys to a corporate empire, the digital guillotine dropped on my family. As a financial auditor, I know exactly how the sequence of events unfolds when a high-tier merchant account gets hit with a federal fraud reversal. The general manager of the Crystal Ballroom, a stern man in a tailored suit, was likely standing near the main terminal in the back office when the system suddenly flared red. The $15,000 deposit that had secured the venue, the premium catering, and the open bar was violently yanked back into the federal ether. It did not just decline. The system flagged the original transaction as unauthorized and slapped a hard hold on the venue's operating account. For a luxury event space, this is a code-red emergency. It means they are currently hosting a massive party for thieves. Out on the ballroom floor, the remnants of Brianna's party were dragging on. The remaining relatives were waiting for the promised midnight dessert service. Brianna was still sulking at her VIP table, glaring at her phone, because her social media metrics had completely tanked after my post went viral. Xavier was pacing near the exit, sweating through his crisp white shirt, realizing that his desperate text message to me had been entirely ignored and his number permanently blocked. The general manager did not waste a single second. He marched out of the back office holding a printed receipt with the word reversed, printed across the top in heavy black ink. He signaled the head of security and walked straight toward the DJ booth. With a sharp, decisive motion of his hand, he ordered the DJ to cut the audio. The loud thumping pop music was instantly killed, replaced by the jarring, echoing silence of a massive empty ballroom. The few guests who were still attempting to dance stopped dead in their tracks, looking around in utter confusion. The manager then signaled the catering staff. The waiters immediately stopped pouring the expensive liquor and began pulling the plates of appetizers back into the kitchen. He walked directly up to the head table where Beatrice was sitting and attempting to look regal. Xavier froze in his tracks. Brianna snapped her head up, ready to yell at the staff for ruining her carefully planned aesthetic. "Excuse me," the manager said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden quiet of the room. "We have a critical issue regarding the payment for this evening." Beatrice scoffed, waving her manicured hand. "The event is fully paid for. I personally authorized the transfer from my family trust account days ago. Go bother someone else." The manager placed the receipt face down on the silk tablecloth. The transfer was just reversed by the Federal Banking Authority due to a reported fraud alert. The funds have been seized. As of this exact moment, this event is completely unpaid for, and we are legally required to halt all hospitality services immediately. Beatrice's face flushed angry red. "That is impossible. Run it again. Run the card on file. There must be a glitch in your cheap system. We cannot run a card that has been locked by a federal fraud investigation," the manager replied, his tone turning to absolute ice. "The total balance for the venue rental, the catering consumed, and the open bar is $15,000. I need an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to contact the authorities for theft of services." Xavier rushed over, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy black metal credit card, slamming it onto the table. "Just put it on this. Hurry up and turn the music back on before the guests notice anything is wrong." The manager picked up the metal card and pulled a mobile terminal out. He inserted the chip. The machine beeped aggressively. "Declined. Insufficient funds." "Try it again," Xavier demanded, his voice cracking with absolute panic. The manager tried it again. The machine beeped again. "Declined." Beatrice frantically pulled out her phone to check her banking application. She opened it, expecting to see her personal checking account balance to cover the bill and save face. Instead, a bright red warning filled her screen. "Account frozen pending investigation." By forging my signature on the trust, she had triggered an automatic lock on every single account associated with her social security number. "My accounts are locked," Beatrice whispered, the reality finally sinking in. She looked up at Xavier, her eyes wide. "You have to pay for this. You promised you had venture capital coming in." Xavier stared at his declined metal card, his entire fake empire crashing down. "I have absolutely nothing," he hissed back. The illusion was completely shattered. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when the private elevator doors slid open, delivering me directly into the pristine foyer of my penthouse. The quiet luxury of my apartment was a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the apex, and an even sharper contrast to the absolute financial meltdown I knew was actively unfolding across the city. I dropped my keys onto the marble console table and let out a long sigh. Reaching down, I unclasped the straps of my designer heels and stepped out of them, feeling the cool hardwood floor against my bare feet. I walked straight into the kitchen, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the sleeping city below. I poured myself a glass of iced water, relishing the profound silence that surrounded my private sanctuary. For the first time in my life, my birthday had ended exactly the way I wanted it to, entirely on my own terms. My peace was abruptly shattered by the harsh, vibrating ring of my phone against the marble kitchen island. I looked at the glowing screen. It was Brianna. 1 missed call, 2 missed calls, 3 missed calls. She was ringing the phone off the hook. I let it ring a fourth time before picking it up and sliding my finger across the screen to answer. I did not even have the chance to say hello. "Riley, what did you do?" Brianna screamed into the receiver. Her voice was completely hysterical, a high-pitched shriek that forced me to pull the phone a few inches away from my ear. "You ruined everything." They shut off the music. "The caterers are taking the food back. Mom's card was declined and the account is locked." I leaned against the marble counter, taking a slow sip of my water. I could hear the absolute chaos echoing in the background. I heard the distinct sound of clinking glass as the venue staff aggressively cleared the tables. I heard Uncle David demanding to know why the premium open bar had suddenly been shuttered. The collective murmur of our extended family packing their belongings and rushing for the exit was the sweetest background music I had ever heard. "Calm down, Brianna," I said softly. "Why are you yelling at me? I am just a boring auditor sitting at home. I thought you were living your best life." "Do not play games with me," Brianna sobbed violently. "The general manager just embarrassed me in front of our entire family. He marched right up to the VIP table and told Mom her payment was flagged as federal fraud and reversed. He turned on the harsh overhead lights. Everyone is staring at us. He is threatening to call the police for theft of services if we do not hand him $15,000 right this second." "That sounds like a terrible situation for a highly successful influencer," I replied coldly. "Why does Xavier not just cover the bill? He is the big tech entrepreneur." "He has nothing," Brianna wailed in pure panic. "His credit card declined right in front of the venue manager. He is standing in the lobby screaming at the bank representative, but they told him his accounts are overdrawn. The investors you stole from us were our last hope. We have absolutely no money to pay for this party. Mom's checking account is completely frozen too. We are literally trapped here." I closed my eyes, letting the sheer magnitude of her confession wash over me. The golden child who had spent her entire life floating on a cushion of unearned privilege was finally crashing into the hard concrete of reality. She had spent the last 2 years treating me like an embarrassing secret, and now she was trapped in a rented ballroom begging that same secret to save her from going to jail. "Riley, please," Brianna begged, her tone shifting to desperate pleading. "You have to help us. The manager says if we do not pay immediately, they are locking the doors and calling the cops. Mom is crying in the corner. You have money. You need to wire $15,000 to the venue right now. I will pay you back, I swear. Just do not let me get arrested on my birthday." I set my water glass down on the counter. The audacity was truly breathtaking. She was asking me to pay for the exact same party she had explicitly banned me from attending. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want me to wire $15,000 to replace the $15,000 Mom originally stole from my eldercare trust account? You want me to pay double for a party I was not invited to simply because your fake millionaire husband is entirely broke?" There was a sharp, sudden gasp on the other end of the line. The hysterical crying abruptly stopped. "What are you talking about?" Brianna stammered, the realization slowly creeping into her voice. "What eldercare trust are you talking about?" "Mom did not tell you," I asked, letting a cruel smile form on my lips. "She forged my signature to drain my emergency savings. That was my money paying for your premium aesthetic tonight. I simply reported the fraud to the Federal Banking Authority. I did not ruin your party, Brianna. I just took my stolen property back." The line went completely dead silent for a few seconds. The only sound coming through the receiver was the heavy, frantic breathing of my sister. She was finally processing the magnitude of the situation. The protective bubble she had lived in her entire life had just violently popped. I heard the phone fumble, the sound of plastic hitting the table, followed by a chaotic rustling. Brianna was not answering me. She had dropped the phone. A moment later, the plastic receiver was aggressively snatched up. "Riley, what is wrong with you, my mother?" Beatrice hissed into the phone. Her voice was shaking, stripped of its usual arrogant superiority. "Tell the bank you made a mistake. Tell them you authorized the transfer. You are going to get me arrested." "I am not going to commit perjury to cover up your federal crime, Mom," I answered, my voice steady and devoid of sympathy. "You walked into a bank, forged my signature on a legal document, and drained an emergency trust fund. You committed serious wire fraud. The bank caught you. This is the consequence of your own actions. It was family money! Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking into a loud sob. I was going to pay you back. I just needed to borrow it for one night so your sister could have a decent birthday. You are being completely vindictive. Call the fraud department right now and release the hold. Over the speaker, the deep, authoritative voice of the venue manager cut through my mother's crying. I do not care about your family drama, the manager said loudly. I care about the $15,000 you owe my venue. You have exactly 5 minutes to produce a valid form of payment, or I am locking the front doors and calling the police department. I will have you all escorted out in handcuffs for grand theft. Mom, do something, Brianna wailed in the background. Her influencer persona was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified child. I cannot go to federal jail. My brand will be completely ruined. Riley, please, Beatrice begged into the phone. She was openly weeping now, the sound echoing through my quiet kitchen. Please do not do this to us. You made your point. You showed everyone how powerful you are. Now please, I am begging you as your mother. Wire $15,000 to the venue right now. Save us from going to prison. I will do whatever you want. I will sign a contract. I will pay you back every single penny with interest. Just send the money. I listened to her cry into the phone. For years, I had craved her validation. I desperately wanted her to look at me and see a daughter worth protecting. But hearing her beg me to clean up her mess, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt. Just the cold reality of an auditor looking at a closed ledger. I cannot wire you the money, Mom, I explained slowly, ensuring every word landed with maximum impact. Even if I wanted to, the federal banking system does not work that way. When an account is flagged for severe fraud, the system automatically locks down all associated financial profiles to prevent further asset bleeding. By forging my signature on a joint trust, you triggered a total lockdown. If I try to wire money to that venue on your behalf right now, the bank's security algorithm will instantly flag my personal accounts for suspicious activity and freeze my assets too. There was a sharp gasp from Beatrice. She was finally realizing the inescapable trap she had built. You tied your financial identity to a felony. I continued, my voice echoing slightly in my penthouse. I am a senior financial auditor. My entire career is based on strict legal compliance. I am not going to trigger a federal investigation into my own portfolio to bail you out of a crime you committed against me. You wanted the premium aesthetics. Now you have to pay the bill. But we have nothing. Beatrice sobbed loudly, the panic fully overtaking her. Xavier's cards are all declining. My checking account is locked. Your father does not have that kind of liquid cash. We are going to be arrested, Riley. They are literally dialing the police right now. You are abandoning your own family. You abandoned me the day you stole my college fund to buy her a car, I replied, my voice turning to absolute ice. You abandoned me when you kicked me out into the freezing cold so Brianna could have a closet. You abandoned me today when you stole my money and banned me from my own birthday party. I am not abandoning you today, Mom. I am simply letting you experience the harsh, real world. I did not hang up the phone. I pressed the speaker button, set the device down on the cold marble counter, and listened to the spectacular implosion of their carefully constructed universe. The audio was crystal clear. Over the line, Xavier's voice rose in a frantic pitch. He told the general manager to wait. He claimed the metal card he had just used was just a low-limit debit account. I heard the unmistakable snap of a leather wallet opening. He pulled out his prized possession, the heavy black corporate card tied directly to his startup's operating capital. It was a card meant strictly for business expenses, but desperation makes a mockery of corporate compliance. He slapped it onto the table. Run the black card, Xavier ordered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and misplaced arrogance. There is a $50,000 limit on that account. Just run it and get the music back on. I leaned in closer to the phone. As a financial auditor, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I had looked at Elevate's balance sheets just hours ago. The operating account attached to that black card had been completely drained to pay off a high-interest bridge loan last week. He had absolute zero liquidity. The manager's side took the card and inserted it into the mobile terminal. The machine processed the transaction. The silence in the ballroom was so profound, I could hear the faint electronic hum over the phone. Then came the harsh, repetitive beep. "Declined," the manager stated flatly. "The terminal says the account is delinquent and the card is permanently restricted." "Do you have any actual money, sir, or should I dial the authorities right now?" The collective gasp from our extended family echoed through the speaker. Aunt Martha, who had spent the entire evening bragging about Brianna's wealthy husband, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was sharp and filled with absolute disgust. "You mean to tell me you have no money? You invited us to a luxury venue, made us dress up, and you cannot even pay the catering bill." Uncle David chimed in his chair, scraping loudly against the wooden dance floor as he stood up. "This is incredibly embarrassing. I am not getting arrested because my niece married a complete fraud." "Come on, Martha. Grab your coat. We are leaving." "Wait, please do not leave." Brianna begged, her voice high and desperate. "We are just having a banking error. It will be fixed in the morning." Nobody believed her. The illusion was entirely shattered. I listened to the sound of dozens of chairs pushing back, the rustle of expensive coats being thrown over shoulders, and the rapid clicking of dress shoes heading straight for the exit. The family members who had eagerly devoured the free appetizers and premium liquor were abandoning the sinking ship without a single ounce of loyalty. They did not offer to chip in. They did not offer to help negotiate with the manager. They just walked away in pure disgust, leaving my mother, my sister, and her husband completely alone to face the consequences. Then the true ugliness of their marriage finally erupted. With the audience gone, Xavier completely lost his mind. He violently grabbed the black card off the table and threw it directly at Brianna. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice raw and echoing off the empty walls. "You and your stupid fake aesthetic," Brianna shrieked, instantly going on the defensive. "My fault. You are the big tech founder. You are supposed to be rich." "I am completely broke because of you," Xavier roared. "I have spent the last 2 years funding your pathetic influencer lifestyle. You demanded the luxury cars. You demanded the designer clothes. You demanded a $15,000 birthday party just so you could take photos for strangers on the internet. I drained my company's operating account to keep up your delusion. I lost my investors because they saw right through this tacky facade you forced me to build. You ruined my business." "You lied to me," Brianna cried out. "You told me you were a millionaire. I played the part you wanted," he fired back ruthlessly. "But the money is gone, Brianna. It is all gone. I am facing bankruptcy, and now I am facing a police interrogation because your mother stole money to buy you some balloons. You are both completely toxic, and I am done." I stood silently in my perfectly quiet kitchen, listening to the golden couple tear each other apart. The foundation of their relationship was built entirely on money and status. The moment the money evaporated, the love immediately vanished, revealing the bitter, resentful strangers hiding underneath. I calmly took one more slow sip of my ice water. I listened to the heavy, frantic footsteps of Xavier storming away from the VIP table. The grand, heavy wooden doors of the crystal ballroom slammed shut with a definitive, echoing thud. He had actually walked out, abandoning his wife and his mother-in-law to face the music entirely alone. Brianna's sobs grew louder, echoing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the empty room. Beatrice's voice returned to the speakerphone, shaky, but desperately trying to summon her old manipulative authority. "Riley, are you still there? Are you happy now? You just destroyed your sister's marriage? You drove her husband away on her birthday. He just walked out on her because of you." "I did not destroy anything," I replied softly, my voice completely steady. A marriage built on a $15,000 illusion was already destroyed. The lack of stolen money simply forced them to admit it. "How can you be so cruel?" Beatrice wailed, the panic making her voice pitch higher. "We are standing here with a venue manager who is literally dialing the police department. We are going to be arrested. Is that what you want?" To see your own mother in handcuffs over a stupid misunderstanding? I picked up my glass of ice water, taking another slow sip. I wanted the silence to stretch, forcing her to sit in the absolute terror of her reality. Mom, you are looking at this entirely the wrong way. You are acting like I maliciously plotted against you to ruin your evening. I did not. You froze my checking account. You took the money back right in the middle of the party, she screamed. You forged my signature on a federal banking document, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with clinical precision. You walked into a financial institution, presented yourself as an authorized signer, and falsified legal records to drain an emergency eldercare trust. That is a Class C felony under federal law. I am your mother, she argued aggressively, her voice cracking. I raised you, I clothed you, you owed me that money. I owed you absolutely nothing, I countered smoothly. I chose to build that trust fund to ensure you and Dad would not suffer in your old age. I deposited my hard-earned corporate salary into that account out of kindness. You abused that kindness to fund a tacky party for a 28-year-old woman who has never worked a single day in her life. So I followed standard protocol. I reported the fraud. The bank investigated, verified the forgery, and took my money back. This is not revenge, Mom. This is accounting. The word hung heavily in the air. Accounting. It was the exact profession they had mocked for years, the career they claimed was boring, restrictive, and beneath their glamorous aspirations. Now the rigid laws of that very profession were locking them in a financial cage. So what are we supposed to do? Beatrice asked, her voice finally dropping to a defeated, hollow whisper. You are going to face the manager, I explained methodically. You are going to hand over whatever jewelry, luxury watches, or designer bags you and Brianna are currently wearing as collateral. You are going to sign a legally binding promissory note with the venue to pay the balance within 30 days. If they accept that, you get to walk out of there without handcuffs. If they do not accept it, then you will sit in the back of a police cruiser tonight. Give them my jewelry, Beatrice gasped in pure horror. My diamond engagement ring, or your freedom, I said coldly. The choice is entirely yours. But understand this very clearly, Mom. You are never getting another dime from me. The bank is launching a full fraud investigation into your personal accounts. Because you committed identity theft against a joint trust, they will likely terminate your banking relationship entirely. Your credit score will plummet. You will not be able to secure a personal loan, a mortgage, or even a basic credit card for the next 7 years. Brianna wailed loudly in the background, her cries piercing through the speaker. My life is over. Xavier is gone. My followers are going to find out. I am completely broke. And now I have to give this manager my Cartier bracelet. Tell her to fix it, Mom. Welcome to the real world, Brianna, I said, directing my voice toward her pathetic cries. In the real world, premium aesthetics cost actual money. And when you run out of other people's money, the aesthetic dies immediately. Riley, please, Beatrice whispered, a final pathetic plea echoing through the phone. Just this once. I will sign whatever you want. I will never ask for anything again. You are absolutely right, I agreed, my tone final and absolute. You will never ask me for anything again. Because after tonight, I no longer have a mother or a sister. Good luck with the police. I reached out and pressed the red button on the screen, instantly terminating the call. I slept better that night than I had in over a decade. When the morning sun finally spilled across the hardwood floors of my penthouse, I woke up feeling remarkably light. It was 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. There were no frantic text messages, no demands for money, and no toxic guilt trips waiting on my phone screen. My brother-in-law was permanently blocked, and I had placed my mother and sister on silent mode. I took my time making a fresh cup of pour-over coffee wrapped in a plush silk robe, simply enjoying the quiet luxury of my own space. After getting dressed in a tailored cream cashmere sweater and matching slacks, I headed down to the lobby to retrieve a package from the concierge desk. My building boasts a highly secure private entrance designed specifically to keep the chaos of the city outside. The lobby is a sprawling expanse of imported Italian marble, accented with modern art and soft, warm lighting. As the elevator doors slid quietly open, I stepped out expecting to exchange a polite morning greeting with the head concierge. Instead, I was met with a scene that looked entirely out of place in such an elegant and controlled setting. Sitting aggressively on one of the velvet lobby sofas were Beatrice and Brianna. I stopped dead in my tracks. They must have tailgated a resident through the secure parking garage doors because the front desk staff would never have permitted them entry. The sight of them was genuinely shocking. The glamorous curated facade from the night before had been completely eradicated by reality. Beatrice looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was flattened and frizzy. She was wearing the exact same clothes from the party, wrinkled and stained. Brianna looked even worse. Her face was streaked with thick black lines of ruined mascara, her eyes swollen and red from hours of hysterical crying. The expensive designer dress she had worn to the ballroom was completely rumpled. The moment they saw me step out of the elevator, they both sprang up from the velvet sofa and rushed across the marble floor. The concierge immediately stepped out from behind the heavy mahogany desk, his hand reaching quickly for the security radio. I gave him a subtle, calm wave of my hand, indicating that I would handle the situation. I did not want them dragged out by security just yet. I wanted to hear exactly what they had to say. "Riley, thank goodness," Beatrice gasped, grabbing my arm with trembling hands. Her grip was tight and desperate. "You have to fix this. You have to call the bank right now." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my cashmere sweater. "Fix what?" I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. Brianna let out a loud, pathetic sob, hiding her face behind her hands. "They took my bracelet," she wailed, her voice echoing awkwardly in the quiet lobby. "The venue manager made us give him my luxury bracelet and Mom's engagement ring as collateral. He made us sign a horrible contract saying we would pay the $15,000 by Monday morning, or he is taking the jewelry to a pawnshop and pressing criminal charges anyway." "And your husband?" I asked, genuinely curious about the whereabouts of the fake tech mogul. "He left me," Brianna cried out, her shoulders shaking violently. "He packed a bag while I was at the venue dealing with the police threat, and he completely moved out of our apartment. He said he is filing for divorce. My life is entirely ruined." Beatrice stepped closer, her eyes wide and frantic. "We spent the entire night sitting in the venue's back office being interrogated, Riley. We did not sleep for a single second. The bank sent an official email this morning stating they are turning my file over to federal investigators on Monday for check fraud and identity theft. You have to call them. You have to tell them it was all a giant misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, letting the absurdity of the word hang in the air between us. "Yes," Beatrice begged, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Tell them you gave me verbal permission to sign the transfer slip for the trust account. Tell them you simply forgot. If you say it was an innocent familial miscommunication, the bank will drop the criminal charges immediately. I will figure out how to pay the venue manager back, I swear. Just please do not let me go to a federal prison. I am your mother. You cannot do this to me." I stood completely still, looking silently at the two women who had tormented me for my entire existence. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I turned away from their tear-stained faces and walked the few short steps to the mahogany concierge desk. The head concierge handed me the thick manila envelope I had been waiting for all morning. I thanked him, quietly broke the heavy wax seal, and pulled out a stack of crisp, legally binding documents drafted by my corporate attorney late last night. I walked back over to where my mother and sister were standing and held the paperwork out toward them. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the thick stack of papers. "This is your only way out of a federal prison cell," I explained smoothly. "I am not going to lie to the bank. I am not going to commit perjury by claiming I gave you verbal permission to steal from my trust fund. But the bank relies heavily on the primary victim's cooperation to pursue aggressive criminal prosecution. If the victim signs a formal waiver of prosecution, the federal investigators usually downgrade the incident to a civil matter and close the criminal file." Beatrice reached for the papers eagerly, but I pulled them back just an inch, maintaining absolute control of the situation. "There are conditions," I stated, my voice echoing off the marble walls of the lobby. This document is a complete financial severance. It legally terminates any and all financial obligations I might have toward you or Brianna. It removes you as a beneficiary from every single policy, trust, and account attached to my name. Furthermore, it includes an absolute admission of guilt. You will state in writing right here on the last page that you forged my signature and committed wire fraud. Beatrice stared at me in pure horror. You want me to confess to a felony on paper? And the final condition, I continued, ignoring her question, is an ironclad restraining order. You will never contact me again. You will never show up at my building, my office, or anywhere I am located. If you agree to these terms, sign the admission of guilt and walk out those glass doors permanently. I will submit the waiver of prosecution to the bank on Monday morning. You will still owe the venue manager $15,000, and your credit will still be ruined, but you will not wear an orange jumpsuit. You are asking me to sign away my own daughter? Beatrice whispered, her hands shaking violently. I am asking you to take accountability for your own actions, I corrected her sharply. Sign it, or I will call the police right now and have you arrested for trespassing. As Beatrice stood there holding the expensive pen I handed her, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message notification glowed on the screen. It was from Xavier. Despite blocking his primary number last night, he had managed to message me from his failing startup's corporate account. I opened the message. There was no desperate plea for money this time. It was just a high-resolution photograph of a legal document sitting on a wooden desk. I zoomed in on the image. It was a formal petition for dissolution of marriage. Xavier had officially filed for divorce first thing this morning. I looked up from the screen, shifting my gaze to Brianna. She was still sniffling, wrapping her arms around her ruined designer dress. Well, I said calmly, it seems Xavier is far more efficient at filing legal paperwork than he is at securing venture capital. I turned the phone screen around and held it up for her to see. He just sent me this. I assume you will be receiving your official copy shortly. Brianna squinted at the bright screen. Her bloodshot eyes scanned the bold legal header. The realization hit her with the force of a speeding train. A raw, guttural scream ripped from her throat. It was not her usual manipulative crying or an influencer throwing a tantrum. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated defeat. Her knees buckled completely. She collapsed onto the hard Italian marble of the lobby floor, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. Her entire identity, built entirely on the illusion of being a wealthy, successful influencer with a tech millionaire husband, was dead and buried. She had absolutely nothing left. Beatrice looked down at her golden child writhing on the floor, then looked up at my completely unbothered expression. She finally understood that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. With a shaking hand, she pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name next to the admission of guilt. She initialed the restraining order and the financial severance agreement. She handed the thick stack of papers back to me. I reviewed the signatures quickly, ensuring everything was perfectly executed. I slid the documents back into the manila envelope. The concierge, I said, raising my voice just enough to carry across the lobby. Please escort these two women out of the building. If they ever return, you have my full authorization to contact the police immediately. I did not wait to watch them be dragged out by security. I turned around and walked back to the private elevator, leaving the heavy baggage of my past on the lobby floor. I held the thick manila envelope against my chest, feeling the solid weight of my own liberation. Beatrice remained frozen, her shaking hands hovering awkwardly in the empty space between us, as if her muscle memory was desperately waiting for a final embrace. She was waiting for the traditional reconciliation. She was waiting for the moment I would soften, offer a forgiving hug, and tell her that we would eventually figure this out because we were family. But I did not move toward her. I did not soften. I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years demanding my sacrifice while offering me nothing but criticism. I looked at my sister, still curled on the Italian marble floor, completely paralyzed by the collapse of her manufactured universe. They had finally run out of currency, and I was officially closing the bank. I turned my back on them without uttering another single word. The sharp rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed loudly across the lobby as I walked past the private elevators and headed straight for the grand entrance. The head concierge hurried forward respectfully, pushing open the heavy brass and glass doors for me. The crisp, cool morning air hit my face instantly, carrying the vibrant electric energy of the city. Waiting curbside was a sleek, immaculate black luxury sport utility vehicle. The driver, a sharply dressed man named Thomas, who frequently handled transportation for my firm, immediately stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. He offered a polite professional nod as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Riley." Thomas greeted warmly, taking the small leather overnight bag I had brought down with me. "Everything is loaded and ready. John F. Kennedy International Airport, correct. Paris awaits." I slid into the plush, pristine leather seat of the spacious cabin. "Yes, Thomas," I replied, a genuine radiant smile breaking across my face. "Best birthday ever." The heavy door closed with a solid, comforting thud, completely sealing me inside the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of the vehicle. As the engine purred to life and the car smoothly pulled away from the curb, I lowered the tinted window just a fraction. I wanted one final look. Through the thick glass of the lobby doors, I watched the concierge firmly gesturing for Beatrice and Brianna to leave the premises. They looked incredibly small. They were no longer the towering, intimidating figures of my childhood who held the power to dictate my worth. They were just two desperately unhappy people, completely consumed by their own superficial vanity, being escorted out of a world they did not belong in. The illusion of their superiority had been permanently shattered, replaced by the terrifying reality of their own consequences. I rolled the window up, letting the dark-tinted glass erase them from my view entirely. I settled back into the comfortable seat, watching the magnificent Manhattan skyline blur past me as we merged onto the highway. People often romanticize the concept of breaking toxic family cycles. They picture dramatic cinematic screaming matches in the pouring rain or tearful, emotionally exhausting therapy sessions that miraculously end in profound mutual understanding. But the absolute truth is far less theatrical and far more clinical. Breaking a toxic cycle does not require an explosive final battle. It simply requires an unwavering refusal to keep playing the game. For decades, I had been trapped in a rigged casino where the house rules dictated that my mother and sister always won and I always paid their debts. I had exhausted myself trying to prove my value to people who were deeply committed to misunderstanding me. But standing on that rooftop last night, surrounded by mentors who recognized my true worth, I realized the ultimate secret of generational trauma. You cannot heal the people who are actively profiting from your pain. You can only heal yourself by walking entirely away from the table. The financial severance document resting securely in my designer bag was not an act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-preservation. I had amputated a diseased limb to save the rest of my life. The $15,000 my mother had stolen was ultimately the cheapest price I could have possibly paid for my permanent freedom. It bought me clarity. It bought me peace. It bought me the undeniable knowledge that my success was mine alone, entirely untainted by their manipulation. As the black car accelerated toward the airport, carrying me toward a first-class flight and a lucrative new chapter across the ocean, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound lightness. The heavy, suffocating chain of familial obligation was finally broken. The scapegoat had not just survived the wilderness. She had conquered it, built an empire, and locked the iron gates behind her. "The cycle stops right here," I whispered to the empty cabin, closing my eyes and letting the gentle motion of the car carry me forward into the morning sun. "And my beautiful, quiet life is just beginning."